So the topic of our panel is the perspective and limits of the European integration process. So that's the contrast to the previous panel, which dealt with the limits, the geographical limits, the neighborhoods, the enlargement question. And this one is the flip side of the coin, if you want. This is the question of European integration. I will not abuse the privilege of the chair to give introduction. We have an introductory speech in the waiting. I would simply say two words. One is that all the previous models that we have been accustomed to in discussing these issues have been exhausted. Those who thought he believed simply in the functionalist model. You know, as a student of European integration, so we had the functionalist model. Jean Monnet method, you know, one thing leads to another. So you have the common market, and that leads to a single market, and that leads to a single currency, and that inevitably will lead to political Europe. Well, that didn't happen. And then we had other people who believed that the institutions are the key, the institutionalist model. There is no European problem of importance that an institutional reform couldn't fix. Well, that too didn't work out. So we have to rethink in a new geopolitical environment that we have discussed before, what the European integration today is and what are its limits. To introduce our panel, we have Mikuláš Dzurinda as first speaker. It's a great honor and great pleasure to introduce him. I will not read his biography. You have the biographies of all the speakers in your program. I will simply say that he is well known, particularly in this country, as the man who opened the post-Mečiar era. I mean, he closed the Mečiar era, and the man who opened the Slovak transition to democracy and to European integration. Besides being a former Slovak Prime Minister, he's also the president of the Wilfried Mertens Center for European Studies. Great pleasure to introduce Mikuláš Dzurinda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rupnik. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to organizers for inviting me, because I like this man. He deserves our gratitude because he contributed a lot to our freedom, to reunification of Europe, and I enjoyed very special privilege to cooperate with President Havel in his time, and I enjoyed a lot our discussions. And now, if you allow, I go to the point. If I'm asking what problems or difficulties we are passing through in these days in Europe, I would mention two things. Challenges facing by us in these days, in the present day, but also upcoming challenges. And the second, a relatively deep division of the European Union. We are unfortunately divided. Very briefly to both, coming to the main point about the future, how to shape our common European house. Everybody knows that in these days we are challenged by momentous technological development advances, by globalization, by the upcoming fourth industrial revolution, with all consequences, especially for young people, young generation, their ability to create or find jobs, for instance. Then we face very unstable world with terrorism, with a huge wave of migration to Europe, we face a very unstable neighborhood. Very briefly, from Russia in the east with its hybrid war, promoted especially towards Ukraine, with unstable space of the countries of the Eastern Partnership, with Turkey, which is in move with nationalism and autocracy in rise. We have the Western Balkans, which again, unfortunately, remains something like a powder keg, very, very unstable and fragile situation in the Western Balkans. Last but not least, we have Africa, very close neighbor, huge continent, which is from one side underdeveloped, but on the other side, very rich on natality, on human resources. And this combination represents very, very big and potential reservoir for the present, but also for the future immigration to Europe. So challenges are huge. I remember very well the May the 1st, 2004, just 13 years ago, when we entered the European Union. I will remember this day in Dublin forever. Can you imagine in Dublin, blue sky? Everybody was happy. President Chirac made a lot of jokes. I don't know, Kwasniewski from Poland or Tony Blair. We were just happy. Who would have said at that time that in 10 years, in 7 years, we will face financial crisis, terrorism, immigration waves, and many other difficulties. But that's life. So this is the first package, I would say, of difficulties. Current, present day, and upcoming challenges. And the second one is represented by a relatively deep division inside the family. We are divided between the East and the West, between the North and the South, between the older and richer, and between younger and poorer still. And unfortunately, this dividing line now is very, very sensitive, visible, felt, and sensitive. It is fascinating, and I'm asking myself very often, why is it so? Why now we are so divided? Because, you know, both these areas are influencing one another. If we are divided, we are not able to respond to the challenges. Migration. You know very well that we are divided, especially on this issue, the issue of immigration. If we are not able to promote concrete solutions, to achieve concrete results, the division is even deeper. So we are moving in a vicious circle. And the question of the day, by my mind, is how to bridge this vicious circle. Sometimes I have a feeling that we, the new members of the EU, we were not prepared mentally for being a member of the club. We enjoyed freedom. We are enjoying all benefits, but I feel more and more that we have not been ready to shoulder responsibility and the expenditure of being a member of the club. And this is the problem. We were ready only for sunny days, like in Dublin, but we are not ready for difficult times when we should show our ability, also our ability to shoulder responsibility, to show empathy also towards the richest, the oldest, and the strongest country in the club. Also Germany or France have the right to enjoy our solidarity and our empathy. This is the problem, and this is a huge challenge for countries negotiating with us about their potential or future membership to the EU. So the fundamental question in my head is how to bridge this vicious circle. I see 3 points in which we should proceed to the action. And action is the key which is needed in these days. Not proclamations, not beautiful speeches, not fantastic promises, but real action. The first, something should be changed in Europe. The second, something should be prevented or avoided. And number 3, we need also something new. Something like a new vision, maybe a new project, maybe new cooperation in areas which are important for everyday life of people. In Prague, in Bratislava, but also in Paris, in Berlin, in all capital or all member states. Very briefly, the first, what should be changed? I feel very strongly, maybe because I remember Czechoslovakia and all these quarrels about competencies, I feel very strongly that we need to clarify responsibility which is paid at the communitarian level and responsibility of the member states. I tell you why. Sometimes I have a feeling in Brussels, speaking to my friends in the Commission or in the European Parliament, that we pretend in Brussels that we solve all major difficulties or problems of the people, and we do not. Who is responsible for job creation? Big investments as a part of structural funds or a cohesion fund? Are we really in Brussels at the communitarian level responsible for jobs in Prague or in the Czech Republic or in Slovakia? Very often I have a feeling that we just want to be nice, and this is why we pretend that we solve problems of people. On the other side, at the level of the national states, we have introduced something like a national sport. If we succeed, this is the merit of the national state. But if we fail, this is bad Brussels. I remember this also from time of Czechoslovakia, back Prague in Bratislava. It was very easy. So we should clarify competencies executed at the European level and competencies or responsibility which should be borne at the level of the national state. The second, what should be avoided or prevented? Further centralization. I love several principles, not only Christian democracy, but also those who are written at our constitution, in our treaties. Subsidiarity. We should prevent further centralization, for instance, in tax system. I will be a bit open and provocative. I don't like to listen about the need of harmonization of taxes. I think that this is a fake if people think that reducing corporate tax, I promote social dumping. This is not true. If I decide to decrease income tax or corporate tax, I have to increase either VAT or consumption tax. And the result should be more or less neutral, sticking to the deficit of 3% of GDP, to the Maastricht criteria. So please, let's be careful about further centralization. It will only be the wind in the sails of populists, extremists, and nationalists. And number 3, what we need new, something new. Cooperation, real cooperation in foreign policy, and real cooperation in defense and security. I am a strong fan of the idea of a European defense union. I strongly believe, but also I feel, that on the basis of Eurozone, new enhanced cooperation will be built. Why? Because we need to move. And it is impossible to adopt solutions in this divided Europe. We just need to go ahead. This is why I feel very strongly, maybe because I know that money and defense are interconnected, that just on the basis of Eurozone, new enhanced cooperation will be built. Everybody will be invited, but criteria will be much stronger than before. I believe in this project. Yes, I am speaking about the need of multi-speed Europe. We already have such a composition, thanks to Schengen, but especially thanks to Eurozone. And in these days, I believe that this should be something like new vision, new project, new idea, which could help bring us together. And paradoxically, yes, from a short-term point of view, from the point of view of the short run, it will be a divided EU. But paradoxically, I believe that such a pressure could help us to be united again. But just knowing that it is impossible to be a member of the club, just enjoying all benefits, but refusing responsibility and ability to share expenditure. Final remark, I believe that it should be also a message for aspiring or candidate countries. I will be very frank and very open in these days. I served in Serbia more than 1 year, helping the country to begin negotiations with the EU. But when I am hearing in these days that Mr. Vučić, former Prime Minister, the President of the state, very strong advocate of the EU membership, if Mr. Vučić is telling that Serbia will apply sanctions on Russia never, I am a bit disturbed. If I am looking at Macedonia, or Fyrom if you want, in these days, with such high nationalism on rise, we should be very careful. Albania the same. By the way, the Western Balkans reminds me a new Pavdrkek in these days. So we need to make it clear that the other countries are welcomed. The project of making Europe whole and free, as our Russian friend has reminded us, we are searching for such a vision, but we need new kind and much higher level of understanding to live together, to operate together, to enjoy together, but also to bear the burden together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dzurinda, for outlining the main issues which we're going to discuss. I will refrain myself for reacting to some of your statements, but I will save that maybe for the conclusion, and I will immediately give the floor to the first speaker, Yves Bertoncini, who is a lecturer in the same institution as I am in Paris, but above all, he's a director of the Jackdaw Institute, an institution founded by the former chair of the European Commission, and who is still very present there. And he's also the chair of the European movement in France. And it just so happens that two of the previous heads of the European movement in France happen to be colleagues and friends of mine, but they are also considered as very likely ministers in the new government. So I don't know what the fate holds for Yves Bertoncini, but I'm delighted that he found time to be with us in Prague this morning. The floor is yours.
Dobrý den. Thank you very much, Jacques, and thank you for the warm welcome. I'll try not to be too long. It's always what you say when you want to be long, but I really try not to be too long. I'm very honored to be here again in Prague. I remember when I was a student reading Václav Havel, Jan Patočka, Milan Kundera, telling us about what was Europe at that time, a divided Europe, but the core of Europe here as well as in what we call the West. So I'm all the more happy to be here, that tomorrow we will sign a partnership agreement with Charles University on Jacques Delors' archives on European integration. And happy to be here yes, right after the elections we have faced in France, we have witnessed in France with the victory of a pro-European Emmanuel Macron. And I want to say this when addressing the perspectives and limits of the European integration, quoting Jacques Delors when he talks about the federation of nation-states, he said, well, united in diversity, it means we're a kind of federation of nation-states or from member states. And of course, what is key first is to have member states in good shape. In good shape. If you don't have member states in good shape, of course, the EU cannot really be in good shape. And then, of course, the perspectives of European integration also relies on the perspective at the national level. And just to say one word on this, I would say that the victory of Emmanuel Macron was not only a defeat of Europhobia, meaning you hate Europe so much that you want to live it, what was Marine Le Pen's position. It's not Euroscepticism, it's Europhobia, you want to live. It was not only a defeat of Europhobia, a clear defeat of Europhobia, but it was also a victory against Franco-scepticism. Franco-scepticism meaning, well, France is in a bad shape and we don't know what to do and Europe is to blame and the world is to blame. And Mr. Macron was one of the running mates saying, of course not, we are France. We can make it. Yes, of course we have problems, but the world is not responsible. We can make it. Wir schaffen das. And I want to say this because it's important, again. After that, on this basis, three very brief sets of remarks on the perspectives, the limits, and Mr. Dzurinda already mentioned some of these limits. And then, if I combine the two, I have to talk about differentiated integration. The perspectives, of course, are stimulating for the EU integration. We are facing a crisis of co-owners, because except from the Brits, we don't want to live, but we argue. We have argued on the constitutional treaties, then on the euro area crisis, and then on the refugee crisis, so we have arguments, and it's not finished. It's built on a trust deficit, solidarity deficit. So, of course, this has to be fixed, reducing the trust deficit, the solidarity deficit. But I think one of the key points is really the trying to look at the world. We are all co-owners, but if we look out of the windows, the perspectives can be stimulating and positive. Why is that? Because the world is full of opportunity, but it's also full of threats. And the EU, because we are stronger together, can be an answer to these threats. The threats have been mentioned already. Vladimir Putin, Islamist terrorism, chaos in Libya, Syria. I could add climate change, energy dependence, financial deregulation. Many, many threats. And our ally, the American, is not that reliable in this very unstable world. Because Donald Trump is very difficult to guess, I may say. So we are stronger together. Then yes, I think there are positive perspectives, but I will add another one, which is not only linked to geopolitical context, which is on identity politics. I've mentioned Mr. Macron's victory on, the fight against skepticism. I think we should build more on the European identity. Yes, we should build more. In this fight between patriotism and nationalism we are witnessing in Europe, being patriot at the national level, but sometimes as well at the European level, because we are linked by a set of core values and principles. And if we compare with China and countries in Africa, and I regret to say with Mr. Trump's America, I mean, that makes us European. We are already Europeans. Respect of rule of law, democracy, gender equality, minority protection, plus peaceful settlement of dispute, plus a kind of economic, social, and environmental model of development. We are Europeans, and I think we should build more on this. The second remark is quicker because, in fact, Mr. Prime Minister, you have already mentioned the limits of the integration process, which are, of course, the subsidiarity principle, So on this, we could do another competence review, because the Brits has made a competence review. What level should do what? And of course, democracy. Well, I mean, it's not Soviet Union, so a member state can even go away. And if ever in this stimulating context, geopolitical context, pushing for more unity, some countries, citizens don't want to join. I mean, they are free to do that. So that are the limits of the integration process. I won't elaborate more on this, just to jump to my third and final point, which is a combination of the two. So, prospecting to move forward, and then subsidiarity and democracy at the national level. And then the combination of this is, yes, the product is a differentiated integration, which is a fact, as you have said. It's a fact. We have already differentiated integration. The euro area, Schengen, the EU level. Even below the euro area, we have even more differentiated integration. You know, the Eurocorps, for example, in the military, it's 6 countries, with Poland jumping back, but no, 5 countries. So we have this, it's a fact. So the challenge for us today in Europe is to try and be positive when organizing this differentiated integration. I think this is key. We need a double or triple positive agenda. The trap is to see, for example, the core of Europe at the euro area level, as if the rest had no importance. Actually, if we want to fight against climate change and energy dependence, we have to fight at the EU level, and even at the world level, by the way. So this is a positive agenda at the EU level. Of course, if we want to address the challenges of migration, terrorism, instability at our borders, maybe the Schengen level is appropriate. Maybe yes, if we want to have a bit more, not harmonization, but a bit more fiscal convergence, maybe the euro area level is appropriate. But what is really key, and I say this from a French perspective, is to have a triple positive agenda. We can even add the 4th dimension, because for countries not members, we also need a positive agenda, and the Brits are about to leave. Some others are not to join, or not in the short run, and then we need an agenda for them. And I think this is a challenge today for Europe, including from a French perspective, because in France, of course, there's a temptation to recreate a smaller Europe, you know, because smaller Europe was better before. And so to recreate something at the euro level, maybe, and then maybe to push forward, not considering the other levels. So in a nutshell, my final word, we don't need a multiple speed Europe. We need a full speed Europe, but at multiple level. And I think that was the key message I wanted to share with you today in Prague for the start of this discussion. Thank you. Merci.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, full speed Europe, we will have to discuss how that can be implemented, who joins which part of that full speed Europe, because that's, after all, the core of the debate. And I think the distinction that you mentioned about patriotism and nationalism, that's the one we heard from the French president in the debate with Marine Le Pen. He says, we are patriots, we are nationalists. A patriot is somebody who loves his nation. A nationalist is somebody who hates the others, and Europe at the same token. So this is the way you connect the domestic debate to the European.
With your permission, this is a sentence by Romain Gary. Romain Gary, who was born in Vilnius, changing name 3 times this town, and then we settled to France, and he was one of the major French writer of the 20th century. Sorry for that.
Yeah, so you borrowed from Macron, Macron borrowed from Romain Gary, who got it from Vilnius, etc. Great. This is exactly the spirit in which we want to conduct this dialogue. Our third speaker is Thornike Gordadze. Great pleasure to introduce a colleague and a friend.
Former student.
and a former student I wouldn't have dared mention, but he does mention it. You see how far he's got after that. So that now he has been. This is more relevant to our discussion. He has been Minister for European Affairs, State Minister in charge of Euro-Atlantic integration in the government of Georgia until 2012. He today works at the Institute of Higher National Defense Studies in Paris, and it's a great pleasure to have him in Prague today.
Thank you.
Oh,
no, thank you very much, Jacques. I'm really happy to be here for the second time to participate in this European dialogues here, and my perspective is quite. I would not say unique, because there are some other people who have double citizenship and double identity. But my challenge is to speak as a former member of Georgian government, a person who conducted negotiations on association agreement with the European Union, but also an academician who tries to have a more distantiated vision of Europe's neighborhood. And I would continue on this literary discussion about who borrowed what from whom. I was thinking this morning when we started this discussion about European borders, about another great French author, Paul Valéry, who said that he was quite a pessimistic person, and he said, unfortunately, Europe risks to become a peninsula of Asia. And in order to avoid this development, I think Europe should keep the idea of enlargement alive. It, of course, doesn't mean that tomorrow Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and a few others should become very quickly members of the European Union, but killing this dream will have an extremely negative influence, at least in this part of the world, because there is no third way. At this stage, there is the way of Vladimir Putin and authoritarian Russia, and the European way. There is no possibility of a third way, and this is a big illusion to believe that, okay, we should leave this part of the world to Russia. They will take care of this region, and it will bring more stability. This is a mistake. The very moment when Viktor Yanukovych decided to abandon the process of signature of the association agreement, it provoked unrest and Maidan, a revolution in Ukraine. Nobody in this part of the world, I mean the former Soviet Union, is attracted really by Russia. There are countries that have no choice, like Armenia. Armenians negotiated in parallel with us, with Georgians, the association agreement, and then like 2-3 months before the signature, Russia put such a pressure that Armenia decided to abandon and to join Russian-sponsored Eurasian Union. But Russia's power of attraction is nothing compared to what's still European Union, which is in crisis, and we know all the difficulties, but still exerts great power of attraction for these countries. And again, coming back to the discussion about the borders, Europe is hardly a continent. Europe doesn't really have physical borders. Even those physical borders, if we take Bosphorus or Ural, are not really borders, because Bosphorus cannot even divide a city. So how can Bosphorus divide a continent? And Ural, yeah, it was decided, it was a political choice to put Ural as, by Peter the Great, to put Ural as a, because he wanted European Russia, and it was a political decision. So Europe's borders can be only political and cultural, and what is cultural is also political at the end of the day. That's why it's European borders, it's more like isotopes, like meteorological map, more than like something fixed forever. And we should keep it in mind. Second question about geopolitics. Yes, it's also geopolitics, because a few years ago when, as a part of Georgian government, I was discussing with my Brussels counterparts about about geopolitics and the Russian threat. That was before Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. Most of my colleagues in Brussels would answer, oh, come on, you are nostalgic of Cold War. We don't want this again. And geopolitics is like a word not to say in Brussels. And okay, we were like in minority, and it was very difficult to make our voice heard. But then happened Ukraine, and then happened annexation of Crimea, and all of a sudden it became the main issue. And temporarily, the association agreement, which doesn't have a mention of European perspective, was negotiated and signed before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And that's why maybe many, at least Western European historical member states, didn't want to put this European perspective in clearly in the text of the association agreement. But then it became clear that something has to be done in this region, and to engage more actively in this region politically. And that's why at least France and Germany try to promote the discussions in Minsk group. Maybe the last few points about the Eastern Partnership. At the end of it, so it was launched here in in Prague in 2009, and in 8 years the results are, I wouldn't say it's not enough. We have got some very tangible results. At least 3 countries out of 6 have signed association agreement, have signed DCFTA treaty with the European Union, and 3 of them, of course, again got visa-free movement with Europe. These changes make, we hope, the evolution, political evolution of these countries irreversible. The 3 others have disconnected for various reasons. I've mentioned Armenia, there is Belarus and Azerbaijan for other reasons, internal political development mainly, and the fact that Azerbaijan is not really interested anymore in association agreement or free trade agreement, more in just exchanging energy with the European Union. But what should be done next? Because we cannot stop at this point, and there should be a reflection about the future of these countries, at least those who are advanced now and who want further integration with the European Union. And there should be much more communication from European Union in these countries, much more involvement in trying to solve protracted conflicts, because these conflicts can erupt again. We saw last year Karabakh war started again for 5 days, but it was violent enough to fear a big eruption of a big war. Georgia is still 20% of the country is occupied by Russia. Ukraine is divided. I mean, not divided in the rest of Ukraine, but a part of it is out of the control of a central government. So the European Union should be very active in this. And the European Union should never, and I'm back to the geopolitics, should never abandon the idea that geopolitics and interests, because geopolitics is about interests, are not contradictory with values. Defending values can be in our interests, and abandoning people who in the countries who are far away or close to the European Union but politically far away, like Belarus or Russia or Azerbaijan, those people who believe in European Union and who are politically our allies and our bases in these countries, because for some real politic reflections is a great mistake. The example of Syria, we have been so inactive in Syria that those people who started Syrian revolution turned to become at the end Islamists, and the main force that is fighting now against the authoritarian regime are the Islamists of different type, or the radicals, less radical. And the idea of European type of liberal democracy has no success at all in this country. At the beginning it started with this idea that we need freedom and we need this European idea of freedom. So that was a mistake, and we should not repeat the same mistake in these countries. And Russia is very active. We see that Russian soft power is now working, and in different elections or even opinion polls, we see that people start to be It's not the case yet in Georgia or in Ukraine because of the war. There's still fresh memories of the war with Russia. But in Moldova, pro-Russian forces won presidential elections. They can win also parliamentary elections. So Europe should be more proactive and more engaged in this area in order not to lose it entirely. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Thornike. So we have the two issues, you know, the issues about the limits of integration in terms of how deep it should go, and then there are the...
Can I just add, just 1 second? This internal integration and deepening integration is not contradictory with more proactive neighborhood policies, approximation, even integration, because every wave of enlargement was followed with the wave of deepening of institutions, and it's not because we have 28 member states that
well, you preach a converted. I'm a professional enlarger. I have spent better part of the 1990s and 2000s arguing for enlargement. That gives me, of course, then the duty and the obligation and the freedom to speak very frankly and loudly when I see certain basic values trampled upon by some new members of the European Union. You know, when I hear talk of a need for a counter-revolution in Europe coming from Orbán and Kaczynski, I say this is not exactly what we had in mind when we were arguing for the enlargement to Central Europe. Okay, so this is just to make clear that I'm not opposing one to the other. I'm simply saying we have there the second important issue, that is a geographical limit of enlargement. And you are right to say that in the debates about Europe, you know, geographers have plenty of definition. About Russia, how European is Russia, Turkey, both Euro-Asian powers. You know, what kind of relationship should the EU have? And we should distinguish there Europe from the European Union as such. These are two different things. We may want to bring one as close as possible to the other, but these are two distinct things. So the borders in terms of geography and the borders in terms of politics and values and capacity to integrate is things that we may want to distinguish in the discussion. Anyway, again, moderator must moderate himself, and I immediately give the floor to Miroslav Zámečník, who is an economist, who is a member of the Government Economic Advisory Council. He has been part, as I read in his biography, of the negotiating team of CEFTA and the Czech representative in the World Bank. So, pleasure to have a local representative on the panel.
Well, thank you very much for invitation. Thank you also for attributing me to beautiful country of Poland. Of course, you know, nobody's blaming you, you know. But actually, I'm the second Slovak on the panel, you know, but with the Czech passport. And Central Europe has always been a very interesting melange, you know. So, and I'm a typical product, you know. I have some relation to Hungary, actually none to the Poland, you know. And so my paternal grandmother was German. And you could continue, you know, I'm a Slovak ethnically, so-called, you know, with these reservations by my name is Czech, you know. So but it creates tremendous difficulties when you try to be understood, you know. And of course, you know, I understand, you know, that patriotism is good for us, you know, while nationalism is bad, you know, because, of course, you know, if you have to explain your name, how come you say you're Slovak when you have a Czech name, you know? It's clear that you are no good Slovak in the eyes of nationalists, and you are not good Czech in the eyes of a Czech nationalist. But when we're talking about the perspectives and limits to integration, there is one interesting piece of news, you know. Do you know that that after 114 years, about 114 years, Russia again became the largest exporter of wheat in the world last year. Yes, Russia, which was unable to feed itself, for greater part of Brezhnev era, from 50s onwards, it was the importer of grain. And the interesting thing is, that they are number one exporter by volume, And this year, if they have good harvest, it will even increase more. A similar situation is in Ukraine, and we are talking about integration. Do you think that there is a under the comprehensive free trade an association agreement with Ukraine, that there is a free trade with grain with Ukraine? No. No. So if we want to do something with Ukraine, we have to do something with a common agricultural policy within the EU, and this will be one very difficult process, because you have very competitive farmers in France, but also in Poland, not so competitive farming sector here, but at the same time we were number 14 exporter of wheat last year as well. The Czech Republic, very small country, because we don't process, we just export raw material. These are paradoxical things. And when you dwell on actual trade integration, you notice that there are two sets of beneficiaries, and one is Central Europe, Visegrad, quote unquote, and the other is Germany. That is the most successful example of trade and investment integration that we have seen in a very, very long time. Czech Republic is more integrated with Germany in terms of trade and share of trade and number of jobs, that are stemming from our trade relationship with Germany than Austria. Slovakia is very closely following the Czech Republic, and by the way, Slovakia is, in per capita terms, number one car producer in the world. Country of 5 million people is producing 1 million cars. Imagine this. So it is only integration that brought it together. And it's part of what I call Central European manufacturing area, which is by far now combined, by far the largest. Yeah, and it has helped both sides. Why do you think Germany has a big manufacturing sector? Because through its cultural, geographical, and economic proximity to those markets, it was very easy to relocate. So for Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia, in all cases, Germany is, with a significant distance, number one trading partner. And by the way, Czech Republic is number 10 partner for Germany. So for a country of 10 million, it's also very significant. So when we're talking about integration and we talk about economic integration, it is very, very advanced. What is not advanced is a political integration, for obvious reasons that you guys have discussed before me. And the challenges are, for instance, why the country which is most integrated doesn't have euro as a currency, for the Czech Republic. Well, there are two explanations to this. First, Czechs are happy with their currency and had very competent central bankers, who didn't mismanage the currency. It is still one of the stable currencies. It had the episode of managed exchange rate, that just ended last month for 3 years, but it was also for good economic reason. But anyway, there is a lot of trust, for a significant period of time. The basic rates, of the Central Bank of Czech Republic, the Czech National Bank, were lower than those of ECB. interest rates were very low. People don't have any problem with their currency. They love it. 75% of people in this country would be against adopting euro, while in case of Slovakia, where the attitude of the people to the currency was much weaker, obviously, the satisfaction with having euro as their own European money is very high. And this is in a country where we had, a very, very extended period of common history. That is interesting phenomenon. So first, there is a satisfaction with it, and why messing up with something which is considered a success and a part of our identity and national heritage? Of course, we are obliged to do it, through our accession obligations, But now let's answer the second thing, and I will finish at that, Do you really think that for a country which is having successful monetary policy, and people like their currency, quitting something that works, for something which obviously doesn't work, which is the Eurozone, is something which is sexy and rational? No way. So you have two very strong reasons. One is positive, the other is negative. And the negative one, so where should we start with integration? Well, it's abundantly clear, that you have to start integrating more within the Eurozone. Doing it in a very positive manner, this is exactly what you said. If you do it positively, it will not act as deterrent, it will not create hostile feelings in this country, in Poland, and, there are many paranoiacs around, so having a positive spin to deepening of integration in Eurozone will ultimately lead to Czechs abandoning their treasured currency and joining the Eurozone. But you have to lead by example, not by a negative one, but a very positive and strongly persuasive one. I'll end at this. We will continue later.
Well, thank you very much, including for clarifying some of the reasons why non-integration sometimes in this country may be seen as a good idea. Although, I mean, you're an economist, not me. I've heard many other economists, Jan Švejnar among them, saying if Czech Republic is doing 70% of its trade with the Eurozone or whatever, its interest should be to join the same currency as its main trading partners. So
yeah, if it's working properly, you're definitely right.
Okay, so if it's working properly, anyway, I just wanted to mention the counter-argument that I've heard from a distinguished economist that you, I'm sure, know very well. Okay, we have heard the introductory speeches. I want to ask panelists if they wanted to react, to respond to something that they have heard. Otherwise, I will open the floor to the questions from the audience. Is that the preferred idea? Okay, so we have some time, not much, but we have some time for questions from the audience on any of the topics that we have heard. Oh my God, this is unanimous approval, but there have been very different views. It cannot be unanimous approval. You have a question? Yeah.
Charles Ross, European Anti-Corruption Center. I'd like to thank Ambassador Mikhail Żądowski and the Václav Havel Library for continuing an important European tradition of the Václav Havel Dialogues. It takes a little vision to see the needs of the future and to know the answers today. The European project, per se, is at a crossroads, and the crossroads is of great importance. As we've heard this morning, there are many challenges, but I'd like to point out one opportunity in particular and ask for your perspectives. In the years since the Velvet Revolution, we have seen great and wonderful changes in the Czech and Slovak republics and in Central Europe as a whole. With the revolution of dignity in Ukraine 3.5 years ago, we now see an amazing opportunity for jobs and business throughout Europe. And indeed, I believe that a large part of the nationalist complaining in various countries is about a feeling of a lack of opportunity locally. And that this is, in effect, part of the poison of populist nationalism. In the next 35 years, we will see a level of investment from all sources in Ukraine in helping the Ukrainians rebuild their economy and join Europe fully and the international community at a level an order of magnitude larger than the Marshall Plan. What is your vision on how to help implement this process, and what are the areas that we should be especially sensitive to avoid mistakes from your experience as participants in the process? Thank you.
I don't know, Prime Minister Dzurinda, you want to? Yeah.
You mean towards Ukraine, yeah? Well, I generally agree with your description that the process is hopeful. The country is changing. We can witness some positive changes, the regulation of prices, especially in energy sector, which has been very sensitive, is being still very sensitive. But on the other side, helping to eliminate the influence of the oligarchs, which is very important in Ukraine. So if I should answer your question very shortly, Ukraine should be given a chance, knowing that if the country is able to meet criteria, it will be invited. But being very often, we should be very, very frank and open speaking with them, telling them that the country must be really competitive, prepared, well prepared. On the other side, everybody speaks about corruption, which is still true. There is a move, a positive move. There is a fight against corruption, but it is necessary, by my mind, to remind the leaders that nobody is likely to contribute unless Ukrainian government shows real commitment to fight corruption. This is still very important. I am traveling to Ukraine pretty often. Last time I was in Kharkiv. There was a man in the morning panel. I was a bit nervous following his question, because everybody in Kiev speaks Russian. It doesn't mean that if the mayor of Odessa speaks Russian, he is not, you know, an Ukrainian patriot. Who in Komarno in Slovakia speaks Slovak? Who in Šturovo speaks Slovak?
Slovak on a visit.
People speak Hungarian, and we are not nervous because of it. So the country is moving on the right direction. We should encourage them, and being very, very honest, we must be honest, telling them that, look, we are open, Ukraine is an European country, but we just need to meet criteria. And criteria will be even stronger than in our case because of this, and because of this. Ukraine matters, and not only because of reality that it constitute a buffer between Russia and the European Union. Strategic location.
So,
just briefly, economically, if you look at some basic facts, you know, and the potential of Ukrainian, let's start with farming. Yeah, it has more black earth than territory of UK. Yeah, entire territory. There is no black earth in UK, you know. So you have immensely underestimated potential. It has been, you know, 110 years ago, you know, it was a part of Russian Empire and a major part of the exports of wheat, you know, were through port of Odessa, by the way. Yeah. So this history, you know, it gives you plenty of potential. You know, there are two preconditions for this. You know, element of stability, you know, including conflict resolution in the east and a resolution over the Crimean issue, and good governance. Otherwise, you know, everybody, you know, how Argentina was built, you know, on fertile land, you know, and it was one of the richest countries in the world, you know, 120 years ago. So there is a potential that is undeniable and could be coming any time, you know, if you have a stable government and no corruption. By all means, you know, everybody will come.
All right, at least we know what the Ukrainians have to do, stable governments and no corruption. Once they fix that, the rest will be easy. I have three speakers lined up. I have Michal Žantovský, Prince Schwarzenberg, and the lady at the back. So I was wondering, are we doing okay for time? Can we take them separately?
We're not doing too badly, no.
We do.
I was very intrigued by the distinction that Mr. Bertoncini drew between the idea of variable speed Europe and variable speed integration and variable areas integration. I think it's a very constructive distinction. But it reminded me of something I read in the media earlier today, and what I want to ask about. There is now a new set of temporary arrangements between the European Union and Switzerland on the free movement of labor from Bulgaria and Romania. Of course, Switzerland is not a member of the European Union, but it's a member of Schengen and the economic area. And the article made a point that if we manage to make similar arrangements with Britain last year in the negotiations, then perhaps the Brexit referendum could have come out the other way around. And my question is a little provocative, but isn't it also a possibility to think about this as one of the variable areas instead of swearing on it as an article of faith, which in fact allows, in theory, allows every single Bulgarian to up and move to France, because that's you know, that's one of our principles.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we can take the three questions together and then have a joint answer. First, the lady in the back, ladies first, and then Karl Schwarzenberg.
Thanks a lot, Valeria Karableva, Kyiv University, Ukraine. I would like to go back to the French elections and take an advantage of having you here, because I really don't know if it's cutting this tendency or reversing the tendency of populism or simply mobilizing Euro-enthusiastic electorate. Or to put it differently, how can we reach to this electorate of frustrated people? Because we are all in a bubble of these sort of pro-European talks, but there are people who are frustrated. And can we analytically decouple this sort of value community of Europe and these abuses of global capitalism or whatever is there? Because what you said about Slovak producing a lot of cars, it's still about the persisting cleavage between the West and East. Wages are lower there, and it also causes some frustration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Karl Schwarzenberg.
Two remarks. One, I'm quite amused that whenever I hear a discussion about Ukraine, everybody gives good advice to Ukraine what they should do. And I would be very happy if each and every old European country would be admonished to fight against corruption as much as Ukraine. And if there would be so many initiatives by the civil society in those countries as there are initiatives in Ukraine to fight this corruption, we should, after all, consider the simple fact too that Ukraine is a country which is in the midst of a war, which is waged against Ukraine. And other European countries don't have the pleasure of having a war in its territory and are a bit more lenient towards corruption. That's one thing. The other thing, I agree with Mr. Zámečník that we should accept as soon as possible the euro. But he was correct to say that the crown for the moment is very popular. The only thing is interesting if elections are in October, if the next government will have the courage to face the public opinion and enter serious dealings about the euro. We would need it, the Czech industry needs it, but we are lacking completely is the courage of the government to even discuss this question.
Okay, so I now turn to the panelists who wants to tackle the question. There is the one by Michal Žantovský. There is the one on Prince Schwarzenberg. Anybody wants to?
I can start maybe with the easiest question on France. I say it's easy because, again, the key element in the victory of Emmanuel Macron is kind of patriotism. With trust in France, you know, we can make it. Yes, we can. Wir schaffen das. So, of course, this is what he called the spirit of conquest. Well, to be Czech against delivery, if I may say. To become firm, but it was very striking in a country where the feeling of decline is so high, and the tendency to believe that not at the single level but at the national level, well, it's all done and we will never be king again, and it's all, you know, the world is our enemy. So this is really key, and again, it's not only key for France, it's key for the European Union at large, because in a country blaming the world and the others, of course, you blame the EU. The EU become very easily a scapegoat, as it is in all countries, but it's even higher in countries like France. So, having said this, of course, there will still be victims of the EU. Of course, the EU is a threat to some people. If you have a plant closing in France to go to Poland, of course, these people, they could blame their CEO, they could blame their company, not able to be competitive. But they will blame the EU, they will blame Poland. So these people are lost for the cause, if I may say. But we're in a democracy. The issue is, are they able to form a majority, you know, those blaming the EU, those willing to exit from the EU? And I believe what has happened in France has to be examined in a broader context of the Brexit vote, of course, Trump's victory. And that was something decisive in this context. I personally never believed that there would be a domino effect, you know, that all countries were to live. I remember trips in Central Europe, in Poland, in Hungary. Of course, the level of Euroscepticism is very high, but it's not Europhobia. In Poland, they don't want to live. And then, by the way, that's why we're facing a crisis of co-owners, and we should be careful with each other, because we can't expel a country from the EU. So let's be cautious in trying to try and, you know, settle our disputes, let's say, on the euro area, on refugees, on the rule of law. But the key point is really to look out of the windows. Again, we are 6% of the world population, 6. Less the Brits, 5. And then soon 4, given the demographic evolution. We're united in diversity, so we can insist on the diversity. But let's look at what makes us united and stronger together. And I mean, that's the role of the politicians, of our heads of states and government. So they adopted a declaration in Bratislava, another one in Rome. Now it's time to deliver, but again with a storytelling, able to commit people. Maybe I can stop here and then come back to the free movement of people question.
I have my own now. Maybe 3 remarks. Madam mentioned or picked up the question how to overcome Euroscepticism or to beat populism. I feel, and also given my own experience from my time, I would say that responsible politicians have only one chance to reach results. I was encouraged not only by elections in France, but also in the Northern Westphalia. Look at Angela Merkel. So long time in the power, and she's still successful. I tell you why. Because she is able to reach results, to achieve results. And not only economy, Northern Westphalia, traditional socialist area. She's successful because at the end of the day, people are normal and they watch. And they see that she's fighting also with immigration. And by democratic ways, struggling, visiting either Ethiopia, Mali, Algeria, negotiating different kind of agreements, readmission of people, pushing things ahead. At the end of the day, people appreciate if you are courageous, open, honest, and working. We have only one chance. By the way, in these days, I am watching at Mr. Macron how capable he is to take the action. It will be the decisive factor for the future of the EU. Capacity of new French administration to act and to implement all necessary reforms. Remark number 2 and 3 is dedicated to Mr. Schwarzenberg. Well, we face corruption in our countries, but it doesn't mean that we should neglect corruption in Ukraine. And we should speak about different levels of corruption. I don't want to waste a lot of time. Maybe Mr. Zámečník followed the situation with the trade with coal between Donbass and Ukraine. Buying coals from this war area in Amsterdam prices, which are much higher than the world prices. And the difference is finishing in the pockets of oligarchs. Every day we can witness such a situation. So we should take into account also the level of this phenomenon. And number 3, the last one, the Czech crown. I must tell you, the Czech crown, the beauty of the Czech crown, and relations or obligation to implement the single currency. I was recently reading, Mr. Zámečník, that there is something like a natural Euroization of the Czech economy. I tell you how. In the first quarter of 2017, 1/5 of the total trade among the Czech companies was made in the Czech crown to avoid the risk of the exchange rate change or move. 1/5. And the second very, very special recognition for me is loans. Within the last 5 years, the total volume of loans increased by 20% in the Czech Republic. Speaking about companies, especially small, medium, but total volume increased by 20%. But when it comes to euro, the total volume of trade between the Czech companies, the total volume of loans was doubled in this time within the last 5 years. Doubled, and 1/5 of the trade between the Czech companies is already done in the single currency. So I was reading just recently, maybe 2-3 days ago, that there is something like a natural Euroization of the Czech economy, which by my mind, this is fantastic. Yeah, and this is a natural way which is helping, and I believe that we will welcome the Czech Republic in the Eurozone very soon.
Said former Slovak Prime Minister.
May
Provocation.
just very quick, very brief reaction. That's perfectly normal. You have so much of a production chain which is foreign controlled. You know, there are auto part makers supplying Czech automobile plants. All of them are foreign owned, you know, and the cars are exported. You know, of course you would use euro for this. You know, the key difference is wages. These are in Czech korunas, you know. That's the issue, yeah, and that's a big issue for this election. But Karel, please, you know, don't push your party. I intend to vote for you. Don't push your party into early euro adoption. You know, that's a killer. Please no.
Yeah.
Thornike, Gordadze.
Yes, few words about fighting corruption. Of course, everybody in Europe, the US tells Ukraine you have to fight corruption, rule of law, etc. So there cannot be miracles. I can tell you the experience what my country adopted, and it was very successful. Let's say Georgia now, including by the standards of Transparency International, is less corrupt than half of the European Union member states. But how it was done very quickly after Rose Revolution, and with the help of the judiciary, which was not entirely independent. So the idea was we have to do it quickly because all these oligarchs are thieves, because they got money, like most of them, almost all of them got not really legally. And so now the judiciary has to push them quickly to give this money back. And that was done this way. And of course, then the temptation is here to never allow the judiciary to be totally independent, because you can always claim that there can be a counter-revolution, there can be the return of corruption, so because the country is so new, because the country doesn't have a experience of rule of law. I'm not saying that now judiciary is better in Georgia, of course not. But that was the price that was paid. And in Ukraine, the situation is still quite different from Georgia. First, the country is much bigger. Then the oligarchs are stronger. Then the central government is weaker. In Georgia, central government had all the resources. They had majority in parliament. They had almost all power in the regions. And it was easier to do these reforms. In Ukraine, it's much more complicated. So what to do? If you fight these oligarchs, like it was done in Georgia, as the oligarchs are stronger, they have their security forces, they can really create unrest. They have media. So maybe there should be a new social contract to tell these people, these oligarchs, that, come on, we know how you act. You will not be killed, or you will not take all your money, because they are afraid of that. Because they are accustomed to get everything and to lose everything, like it happens in Russia, or even to lose their lives. So there should be a bigger discussion on these issues, and a solution to be found on together with the state and with the institutions and with the help also of Europeans. That's the idea.
Yeah. A European way of dealing with oligarchs. A big topic for next year's conference, I suppose.
And to avoid them to run to Russia also.
I've been told we have to close now our session, but last word, Yves Bertoncini, who had a question from Microsoft.
Well, I have to answer the organizer's question. No, on what you said, in a nutshell, you know, the four freedoms, let's say, the Rome Treaty, the fourth freedom, we adopted these four freedoms principles all the more easily that first they were not applied, and second there was an opposition with what at that time was the Eastern model, which was a more Sovietic model. So four freedoms not applied, and then progressively applied, progressively implemented. Now we have the freedom of goods, the freedom of capitals, but we don't have the freedom of services. And as regards people, well, it's very limited, actually. I would say in this, three things. First, we need to be careful. That's the question, your question, Madam, on so-called populist. And I agree that Mrs. Merkel never tried to run after the populists, so-called populists, never ever. So on free movement of people, of course, it can create problems. It can create tensions. If you look at Brexit, yes, it was creating tension in some cities, in some, the public services. But what was at stake? I mean, there were also not enough investment in the UK as regards some public services. I mean, and that was not Brussels' fault. Huh? That was their decision. So again, let's be careful on running after the extremists on this. It doesn't mean that the problems are not there. There are problems. For example, we need to implement the European rules much more as regards posted workers, because there are frauds. We all know that there are frauds. So, of course, we did not create Europe to have frauds on posted workers. So this has to be made as well. Maybe some reform, but very quietly, cautiously. But again, my final word, and I'm happy to say this under the aegis of such a prestigious man. We did not launch the European construction to create a supermarket based on 4 freedoms. So, of course, it has to be addressed again. But if we were to promote and to envisage this unity as something different, maybe it's the geopolitics, stupid, as Anna Palacio has said, that would work a bit better, despite economic and social problems which have to be fixed first at the national level, very often, even if there can be an added value at the European level, even if the EU can create winners and losers, of course, yes, but national level, I think Emmanuel Macron is about that. He will fight first at the national level, and then, of course, he will try to promote an ambitious European agenda, and I hope several positive agenda at different levels, yes, indeed. But I think we are really now entering into a new phase of the European construction, more based on, yes, the geopolitics. And if I want to sum it up, when we launched this, we had Truman and Stalin. Now we have Trump and Putin. It's another reason to move forward. And again, it's geopolitics.
Okay, I will not attempt to summarize or conclude the discussion which will continue this afternoon. I like the way Prime Minister Dzurinda highlighted the issues. What we need change. We need to prevent certain things. There are security threats to Europe. And the vision thing, what George Bush Sr. used to call, when they ask him, what's your vision? The vision, the vision thing. Okay. You can scorn it, but you still need to see where you want to be in 20 years. I think that this whole range of questions about the limits of expansion of the EU, but also the limits of integration of the EU, call it differentiated, multi-level, multi-speed, what have you, it really is now on the agenda. The worst things would have been to let things unravel slowly, immobilism, and doing nothing. This is the agenda as we had it, and as some people were predicting the demise not so long ago. There's a new situation in some European countries. There's a new president in France. Maybe the relaunching of the European discussion can help. A Czech journalist yesterday was doing an interview. The first thing, is Macron a good news for Central Europe? Is it good for the Czechs? I said, listen, first it's good news for France. It's good news for Europe because France will be more engaged in Europe. I don't see how something that can be re-energizing the European project would be bad for Central Europe or for the Czechs. I think the main thing is there are two things. Those who do not want to engage in further integration should be able not to do so. You know, you cannot force it. So, but they cannot block those who want to go further. That's one thing. The second thing, those who do pursue certain areas of deeper integration should not exclude anybody from joining that process. So it's an open process. And what will be the final shape, the geography, the multi-speed concentric circles, what have you, that remains to be seen. But these are the two principles. You cannot block and you cannot exclude. Time for lunch. Thank you to all the participants. This was a very interesting discussion.